Shabbat Shalom. Now, in the world of rabbinic oversharing, this story might be one. And full disclosure, my wife was out of town for the last few days working, and I didn't run this by her first. But it's not about her. She's just usually my, stopper. So when I was a freshman in college, I was driving home from rural Ohio to Wisconsin. As you can imagine, it's relatively flat and open and boring as you're driving from Ohio to Wisconsin. And I was traveling at speeds that a 19-year-old might travel at, and the rest of us obviously shouldn't, of course. And I came to a bend in the road, and as I went around, you see where this is going, there was a police car hidden behind a thing and came and pulled me over and informed me that not only was I going a little over the 65 mile an hour speed limit, but that in this part of Maumee County, Ohio, the speed limit is actually 50. And I said, "Oh, I didn't know." And the officer says, "I know." And I said, "No, but I would have slowed down, but I didn't know." And he goes, "No, I know." And I said, "Well, I tried to say," and he said, have you ever heard of a speed trap before?" And all of my sort of pleading did not get me out of the ticket that was coming to me for that. But this story perhaps inelegantly introduces one of the most important halachic categories that we have, one of the most important categories of Jewish law, and we see it for the very first time in our reading today. So as we're talking about the sacrifices and what you do if you've done certain things and which ones require which sacrifices, God says through Moses, tell the people of Israel, nefesh ki techta bishgaga. A nefesh, a person, a soul, when they sin, bishgaga. It's as important as it is fun to say. It means unwittingly, unknowingly. Right? Some of us remember this. It might ring a bell from the Yom Kippur litany, right? Al chet shechatanu lefanecha bishgaga, for the sins that we have sinned in front of you without knowing about it. Right? And then they give what you have to do and what you have to bring in the sacrifices. So this introduces these two incredibly important categories in Jewish law, shogeg and mazid. Don't worry, there won't be a quiz. Shogeg is someone who sins unknowingly, and mazid is the opposite, someone who sins knowingly. But the rabbis, being the rabbis, have to investigate, what does this mean? Because you could imagine at least two different ways of operating knowingly or unknowingly. Right? Ibn Ezra says that the sin of being a shogeg is if you do something accidentally, right? Meaning you thought that the meat was kosher, but it wasn't. You were walking down the street and you tripped into a vat of cheeseburgers, face first, and you just happened to eat. How could you not? That is Ibn Ezra's idea of what it means to be bishgaga, meaning it's an actual accident. There's not disclarity in the law, just in one's actions. Ramban disagrees. Shocking. Ramban disagrees, and he says, no, actually, right, that it says nefesh, ki nefesh, right, techate, when a soul sins. It could have said ki adam, when a person sins. So Ramban says, if it had meant physical, it would have said so. But it says when a person sins in their soul, meaning they don't understand the law, they don't know the law, right? Something that is going on educationally, or perhaps they don't see the sign that the speed limit has dropped from 65 to 50, right? That is a nefesh bishgaga. So the question then is asked by the rabbis, Okay, great. So I appreciate that you create this category, right, which we know, I believe American law, I'm looking at my law professors, of which there are many in the room, right? We have a similar idea, right? In certain torts and things, intent matters, and in certain strict liability cases, it actually doesn't matter at all. Again, as the officer said to me all those years ago, son, ignorance is no excuse. So the question then becomes, why do we require an offering at all? Couldn't we just let the unknowing sinner off with a warning, right? Either they fell in the vat of cheeseburgers, that's not on them, or they just didn't know that it was a rule, that's not on them. Why do we make them bring a sacrifice, admitting some kind of guilt therein? Why do we make them do that at all? Again, our rabbis offer a few ideas as to why a shogeg, someone who sins without knowledge, still has to bring a korban. The Talmud says, "Shehaya lo lilmod v'lo lamad." The Talmud says the reason why someone who doesn't know the law but sins has to bring a sacrifice is that they could have learned. Have you never heard of the Torah? You could read that. What about going to a yeshiva, listening to a podcast? There's ways of learning these things, says the Talmud, and if you don't, then that's on you. It's sort of like saying one can be upset about spoilers for a movie within the first few months that it comes out. But at a certain point, we know how Titanic ends. The spoiler, you can't say, oh, don't tell me that anymore, right? That would be the Talmud saying, Sheyah lo lamed, you had a chance to learn it and you chose not to. So the sin offering then that the person is bringing is not for the action they did, but for not going out of their way or going to learn what they could have learned. The Slonim Rebbe says that the reason why you have to bring a sacrifice is there's a kind of fear that you weren't being careful enough, right? Like, you saw the vat of cheeseburgers, right? You could have been more careful as you did it. You know that certain things are maybe likely to get you really, really angry, and you could have been careful about that. So what you're bringing a sacrifice for is, again, not the action itself, but your lack of carefulness, right? And so there's a smaller sacrifice that is brought in that case. And Ramban, our friend from before, really picking up on this word nefesh, he says that whether you meant to or not, the act of sinning, even unwittingly, he says, stains our soul. Right? It creates a mark on our souls. And the way that we undo that is through the sacrifice or Yom Kippur in our day today. There is a lot that we could do more and dive into this question of what does it mean to be an unwitting sinner. But what I want to take away from this is the amount of depth that the Torah and God ascribe to any individual, even one labeled a sinner. Right? That the Torah and that God and Moses go out of their way to say there are a lot of different reasons why someone might have done something that we're not okay with, and it behooves us to figure those things out before we pass judgment, before we require a sacrifice. And I'm not sure I can think of a more important lesson for us in our world today than that. We look around us and we see a lot to be critical of everywhere we go. Criticism is the currency of our day. It's how we sound smart. It's how we comment on the world. Criticism is the basis of our humor. It's the basis of our politics. It's the basis of the way we enter the world. And the Torah here is saying, careful, because you don't know why someone did what they did. Maybe it was bemazid, it was intentional. Maybe it was bishgaga, it was unintentional. And within the unintentionality, there's a lot of reasons why. Maybe it was just a mistake and they know better, but they just did it. Maybe they didn't understand or know that it was the wrong thing to do in the first place. But we have to figure that out before we ask for recompense, before we get angry, before we claim to know what's in someone's heart when they say something, even if it angers us, even if it offends us. It doesn't mean, again, that a person is not held accountable for their actions, right? Even the shogeg, even the person who sins without knowledge, has to bring a sacrifice. They must be held accountable even if they didn't mean to do it. But the conversation is different, and it looks different, and hopefully feels different. And this is something that I know I have said many, many times from this bima over the last few years. This is not a new message, that we should try to understand one another, that we should think more about one another. And I have to say, this community has been doing an incredible job at that. I just, as an aside, all the conversations I've had with people over the last few years since I've gotten here, everyone here takes each other seriously. Everyone here takes the idea of thinking about others and understanding them better seriously. It's incredible. We can do better. Of course we can do better. Of course we can do more, but you should all be very proud of yourselves for being the kind of caring individuals who stop and ask. I witnessed last week, 2 weeks, some weeks ago, a moment, for HIPAA reasons, I'm not getting into the specifics, but of someone who did something that could have been perceived as offensive, and people found it offensive. And someone said, well, you know what? Before we get very angry, let me go over, and they politely, excuse me, do you understand this? And they had a conversation about it. And I'm not sure where the conversation landed, but the fact that that was the first step was incredibly important. Reminds me of Levi Yitzchak of Berdichev. He was once walking down the street to synagogue on Yom Kippur, and he saw a Jewish fellow smoking a cigarette right by the synagogue. And Levi Yitzchak was, oh my gosh, well, hold on. He walks over and he says, sir, I'm not sure that you're aware that you're smoking. And the guy's like, yeah, I'm aware that I'm smoking. Kids, smoking is bad. And he says, well, maybe you're not aware that it's Yom Kippur. And the guy goes, yeah, no, I know that it's Yom Kippur. And Levi Yitzchak goes, oh, forgive me. It might be that you're not aware that it's forbidden to smoke on Yom Kippur. And the guy, blows a ring of smoke at Levi Yitzchak. And he says, Rabbi, I know that I'm smoking. I know that it's Yom Kippur. I know that it's not okay to smoke on Yom Kippur. Levi Yitzchak looks up at the sky and he says, God, how wonderful are your people that they tell the truth. We should find ways to enter any conversation with curiosity. We should find ways to enter every conversation wondering about the people around us. We don't know when we see a perceived slight, whether it's the big political issues of our day that are dividing us in many, many ways, or it's who was trying to park in the spot first. We should first offer, maybe they don't know, or maybe they don't know what they did. And then we can decide if the way that we get around it is apology, making restitution, just paying the speeding ticket and moving on, right? That is how we get to it, because Kliyakar, the final commentary I'm going to quote, he notes that the verse says, ki techateh, which Rashi says, if you sin. He says, doesn't mean if you sin, it means when you sin, says Kliyakar. Every human being is going to sin. The reason we have these categories of witting and unwitting is because we are all of us going to sin all the time, sometimes on purpose, sometimes not on purpose. And the point of this verse is to remind us that we all do it. We all ask for compassion from others as we deserve it, and we should all give compassion to others as we know they deserve it as well. So I hope that you will join us after Kiddush. We're going to have a conversation that we've done in the past about issues of our day. This afternoon, we're going to talk about what's happening in Israel. We're going to talk about how it's affecting us. We're going to talk about what we understand to be going on. We sent out some articles and some podcasts ahead of time. Rabbi Schwartzman, Rabbi Cooper, thank you for curating that list. If you didn't listen to them or read them, it's okay. You can still join us. But we need to find ways to be a part of conversations, to open up to one another. If we can't do it in this room, where else can we do it? And to treat each other with the kindness and compassion that we all deserve. Shabbat shalom, friends.